Sorry.
We're going to be going live already. So as soon as you see the screen move, Keisha, that's going to be your cue to go ahead and get started.
Okay.
Still don't see. Okay, I think allow.
And we
promote.
stay on camera the whole time? We'll just keep it on? Okay.
And I think, there. Vanessa, can you go ahead and turn on your screen, please? Okay, we have to get started, so I'll go ahead and start the session.
Sounds good.
Okay. Thank you. Hello and welcome, everyone. My name is Keisha Chandler, and I'm proud to serve as the Executive Vice President of the New York chapter at Prospanica. I'm thrilled to be your moderator for today's important conversation in honor of Women's Equity Day. Woo! Today, we gather to celebrate progress, but also to reflect on the work that remains. Our webinar, Women's Equality Day, is a powerful opportunity to engage in meaningful dialogue around the challenges and opportunities facing women in the workplace, especially Latinas, who continue to navigate intersecting barriers in their professional journeys. We also want to take a moment to express our sincere gratitude to Goya for sponsoring today's event. Their support makes conversations like this possible, ones that elevate voices, foster awareness, and spark lasting change. Women's Equity Day is not just a moment on the calendar, it's a call to action. It reminds us that equity is not guaranteed by intention alone. It must be pursued actively with awareness, commitment, and solidarity. Throughout today's session, we'll hear from passionate voices working to break down systemic barriers and build truly inclusive environments where women's contributions are valued, their identities affirmed, and their advancement fully supported. We'll explore what it takes to move from intention to impact and how each of us, no matter our role or background, can contribute to meaningful change in our workplaces and communities. And with that said, I'd like to introduce our incredible panelists. Vanessa Carrillo, Product Marketing Manager at Microsoft. Felicia Medina, Partner at Valerian Law. And Letty Aguilar, Finance Director at AbbVie. So in that order, could each of you please share a little bit about yourselves with the audience? Vanessa?
Okay, let me know if you all can hear me, but happy Tuesday. My name is Vanessa Fernanda. I'm a first-generation Latina born and raised in El Paso, Texas, in the border. Now living in Seattle, I graduated from Georgetown University's McDonough School of Business with a degree in marketing and a minor in computer science. I enjoy volunteering with Alpha, and I spent my free time, when I can, reading, visiting local coffee shops, going to church, and playing pickleball. I am also the founder of Latinas and Lattes, a community that hosts monthly cafecito meetups and workshops focused on wellness and professional development for Latinas. Thank you all for having me.
Thank you, Vanessa. And then I'll pass it off to Felicia.
Hi, afternoon or evening, everyone. My name is Felicia Medina. I'm a partner at Valerian Law in Berkeley, California. My practice is in California, but we practice nationwide on specifically employment discrimination. And I love panels such as this in terms of talking about knowing your rights, what I wish I would have known, what I've seen, because it all advances Latinas in corporate America and in their other endeavors. So very grateful to this organization for having this important conversation. Equality and equity is not outside our reach. It's actually within our hands to make happen.
Thank you, Felicia. And Letty.
Thanks, Keisha. Hi, everyone. My name is Leti Aguilar, and I was born in Mexico and first-generation immigrant in the U.S. I grew up in the south side of Chicago. I attended DePaul and studied accounting and finance, and I also have a CPA. For the past 16 years, my career has been in the pharma industry. Started with Abbott Labs, then it became AbbVie and as a pharma side, so I stayed with AbbVie. And then recently, 4 years ago, I moved to California to join the allergan aesthetics company that that AbbVie acquired at the time, around 5 years ago. So learned about the aesthetics business for the past few years. But actually, we'll be moving on to a different career very soon. So I'm going to be starting a new chapter as well in finance, but a little bit different. So I'm excited about that as well. And I'm just honored to be here and talk about, just Latinas, especially women in the corporate and just professional field. I have always worked in any way that I can to empower women and help, help everybody know what I feel like it took me a long time to learn is that we have a lot of value to bring. And so the sooner we know how to find that and we have the confidence to bring that forward, I think that's when we can start making change. So I'm really excited for today. Thanks.
Thank you. And that was amazing, all of you. It is with great excitement that I get to share this next hour with such inspiring women, and not just women, but leaders who are not just breaking barriers in your fields, but also paving the way for more inclusive and equitable future. And with that said, I'd like to transition into our first question. What specific strategies have helped you advance in your career within organizations where women are often underrepresented at senior levels? Who wants to take that one?
I can start and just kind of get the
Sure.
conversation going. This one, it's near to my heart because I do think, as I mentioned, it took me a while to figure some of this out. I think, culturally, I share with a lot of people in and it seems we all have a similar background, right? And culturally, we are taught that, my parents always said my work speaks for itself. I shouldn't show off. I shouldn't be, too like tooting my own horn too much because that looks bad. And then you're showing off and eres una creída, right? So that's kind of what I grew up with. And even in personal life, right? So people don't like talking about what they have, and it's just seen as a negative thing. I think being in the cultural side, it really conflicts with being in the corporate environment, right? Because I think initially when I waited for people to see my work, they did see it. But I found that other people were advancing faster, and I'm like, well, how is that happening? Like I'm sometimes doing way more than they are, volunteering. I'm doing a lot of things above and beyond. So why am I not getting promoted? Why am I being overlooked? I think, that was one of the biggest shifts for me is the mindset that no one else is going to really come out and know as much as you do about what you do. That's just the reality. So it's really important to learn to advocate for yourself and kind of what that means in your surrounding and in the context that you work in, right? That might be with your boss, it could be with leaders, it could be, whatever environment you're in. It's just important to know where it matters to advocate for yourself. Obviously, you have to be very mindful that it's not too overdone. But I do think that's a huge thing for us as women because we also are typically underestimated. And so a lot of times what happened to me was I'd have an idea and I would say it in a smaller group with a team member, and the team member happened to be a man. And nothing against men, but it tends to happen a lot with men. And then when we were in a bigger meeting with leaders, he would say my idea and use it as his own and would not give me credit at all. And so at the beginning, I just couldn't believe it. Again, I was raised to be respectful and fair and honest. And so I just felt betrayed. And I think after a while, it just became obvious that I just had to learn to kind of fight for myself in a very, corporate way. But so I think that's super important. And I think it's something that I wish I knew younger, as a younger professional. I don't know if
Thank you.
Alicia or Vanessa have experienced anything like that, but I'll open the floor in case they want to add.
Yes, I have actually been in the same situation that you have, Letty, and I resonate highly with exactly the same situation. One strategy that's actually helped me is seeking out mentors and sponsors early on. I intentionally built relationships with the women, especially in the ERG groups, so employee resource groups. There's women ERG groups as well as Latino early in career, but also in general, like Hola, employee resource groups who would give me, like I was seeking out specifically women mentors who would give me that feedback and help me advocate or learn how to advocate for myself in a way in rooms where even if I wasn't present or if I needed some advice, I would go to them because they would have probably most likely have gone through the same thing and can tell me or provide some advice on how to handle the situation. And another in a similar situation that happened to me, Letty, I went to a mentor and she shared a similar story and helped me through that situation. Another thing that I do is I keep what I call an impactful journal where I track like metrics, kudos emails, like I save those screenshots and write down positive outcomes that have come from projects that I've presented and how that has helped me how to confidently show the value that I bring when opportunities come up. And I think that's something that a mentor taught me early on too. So my advice would be, aside from finding like a mentor and a sponsor, starting your own brag folder. Even if it's just on your notes app, like on your phone, that's how I started. I was like, how do I start a brag folder, like I don't know, a list. And I was like, you know what? Let me just, I will pull up my notes app and just like save a couple of accomplishments. Or if someone said something about my work, I'm like, let me save it. And then I'll transfer it to my notes on my computer. But that and not being able to be afraid to ask someone if you see like a girly that you admire in an ERG group, like sending her a Teams chat or just a ping and saying like, do you have a sec for 15-minute coffee chat? Y te compro un cafecito, lo que sea que es, and most likely they will say yes. If not, they'll refer you to somebody maybe they know. But it's been very just a great experience being able to connect with Latinas who are in positions of power, just like mentors. But that's kind of like my take. And I'll pass it over to Felicia.
Before
Yeah.
you get started, Felicia, thank you so much, Letty, for opening up with that vulnerability, and Vanessa for those great examples. And now I pass it off to Felicia. Sorry.
No, thank you, Keisha. It's good to take stock and do these check-ins when we're having these important conversations because it doesn't just roll off the tongue, and there is a fair amount of vulnerability that we want to honor here. Just like I want to honor the vulnerability and the trust that my clients put in me. When I hear about strategies and I represent a lot of women and women of color in various industries, a lot in pharma, biotech, by virtue of being here in the Bay Area, but it really spans the gamut in terms of in STEM and engineers and sales and all types of things. And I think of Judge Yvonne Gonzalez Rogers. She's a Latina federal judge here from Tejas. And she has this acronym of PI, and it means prepare, integrity, and excellence. And so, of course, as a Latina in corporate America, you always have to be prepared, but it shouldn't be at the extent of your emotional, well-being in terms of like having confidence. And confidence is being okay with uncertainty. Doesn't mean that you know absolutely everything possible under the sun about whatever project you're trying to get out the door. But I like that acronym because it packages it really nicely. And, you should always be prepared. You should perform at the exceeds or excellence level. And above all, you need to have your integrity. And that is balancing things that we do get from our culture that are, there should be pluses in terms of not contributing to things that we don't want to see replicated amongst our kids and our culture and our work cultures. And, we have the power to kind of shape that culture. And another thing I see in terms of my clients who are, hugely successful and they had the gall to have a baby or do something like that, and then all of a sudden it goes to a big mess, is to always have your internal business case for you and your role and your head count and message from that business case, in your kind of everyday or strategic meetings, especially. You, of course, should stay abreast of business trends in your industry and adjust accordingly. And what I also was hearing as a common thread was to start good and healthy work and stress reduction habits early and revisit your tools to make necessary modifications along the way. I see many people burn out. I see many people who have worked hard and are accomplished in their careers only to have it unravel because of some other new variable in the situation. I see too many people swallowed up by toxic work cultures. So again, we are the culture and we can change things for the better and not contribute to corporate feminism that is harmful to women collectively and their advancement, and that can also lead to anti-Indigenous sentiment and anti-Blackness. And we don't want to replicate that. At least that's my personal goal, for workplaces that I hope my godchildren and nephew don't enter into. The cases that I see that are the strongest for both legal and non-legal reasons are the matters where there is a strong sentiment of interracial and interethnic solidarity among women. And I think we'll talk later about how to really, really empower your ERG, to have, a bit more data behind it. We're in a data intelligence age, society. And so there's no reason why the ERGs, even in this like attack on DEI, that I do believe we're all going to bounce back from, especially because newer workers entering the workforce, they just have a completely different view of what the workplace should be. So, and, be that as it may, predictions about DEI, we can talk about that for a long time, but also other strategies is to choose a leadership model that appeals to you, that is somewhat true to you, and maybe a bit of a stretch in certain areas, in terms of being aware of your your strengths and weaknesses and improvement areas. And so, developing your people management and interpersonal skills is not soft skills. It is it is a big part of any role, and especially as you're climbing up. Another thing is to get professional coaching, invest in yourself. Women and women of color are underrepresented at higher levels. I see it all the time. Everyone can see it, and we don't have to act like it's not there. It's a reality. And you can see looking at practically any company website, what's happening at the top and whether there's specific roles that are at the top that are already gendered in them of themselves. So getting professional coaching can help you strategize all the complexities of a postmodern workplace, because there's constant assessing this and that, and of course sponsors and things like that should be used in that and as part of your team and your crew. But that's one thing I wish I would have gotten a bit earlier, even entering law school and things like that. I wish I would have had more of a professional coach that could balance some of the things I was seeing in my work site and my school or whatever else. Although I've been out of law school for a while now. So if you are concerned about anything legal compliance wise, whistleblowing, equal pay, equal protection, talk to an attorney.
I think that's great advice, and I love the PI acronym. You mentioned before career coaching, you mentioned, finding Felicia, you mentioned finding that strategy that matches your personality. But I think sometimes women especially get caught up in, this is the way that you have to enter the business world, and things like that. So how do you have any examples of how to find those spaces that we should be, how to find that authentic space, whether it be mentoring, whether it be sponsors or different things. I don't know.
No, it's making sense. And I want to shift to Vanessa and Letty, who have been more squarely in the corporate world, not just representing women, but like I
Sure.
model myself after Stacey Abrams, or I'm, those types of models, or
Mhm.
coaching to success, or listening, or like seeing the women who I admire, and what, like what does leadership really mean to you if you could distill it? Like, does it mean that someone comes out of my office and they know a lot more about me, or is it really that I know a lot more about them? And how, what their career goals are, and what value they can add, and listening is key. But I'd love to hear from Letty and Vanessa in terms of like finding a model that works for you.
Yeah.
I can share a little bit. I think that's a great question, and I think it's a tough one. I do think when we go into any environment, right, where we are probably the only, like in my case, I mean, I work in finance, so there's already not a lot of women represented in finance, and then double, right, the fact that I'm Latina, so especially not a lot of Latina women. And I think there's a component of having to, in order to survive, right, almost like in order to be in that environment, you do have to be very mindful of the environment you're in. Like I work in pharmaceuticals, so it's very regulated, highly regulated. There's just a lot of structure. There's a lot of, legal things to think about. So for me to come in and say, oh, I just want to be myself and I'm just going to play music in my office, and right, like I could claim that that's me being authentic because that's what I like to do at home. But I think I always, I guess, like to separate those, because I do think there's a sense of responsibility that we have with the environment that we're in. And I think we have to learn that what is appropriate, right? And then within that area, then we can start to figure out, how do I bring my authenticity, or how do I bring Leti into the environment. And what I can share, and I can give you guys like a specific example that I didn't realize at the time the impact it had. But afterwards, a lot of people gave me feedback, and it made my heart, feel good about. So for example, I've always been a very talkative person, right? That's my Latina heritage. I've always just been social. I'm empathetic. And so a lot of people, especially women, would share with me some of the challenges that they had with a lot of our offsite meetings. Sometimes the hours they have to pick up kids, they have to drop off kids. So a lot of women would share that with me. And one time we were at an offsite, and I had suggested that we open up the floor so people can share feedback. Like, how can we improve things? How can we make things better? It was like this cultural, we want to improve our culture kind of offsite. And so what I realized is, when the time came, most of the same people that had told me all these things, they didn't step up and they didn't say anything. And I was really disappointed, because I was like thinking, this was the chance, right? We're giving you the platform, like you should have spoken up. And so I was a little bit like worked up about that. And so I spoke up, and I went on this kind of, people told me it was like a monologue, talking about why it's so difficult for us women, and especially moms, and that we actually have to do so many things even before we get into the office. And I went in this whole thing, and then part of me was thinking like, oh my gosh, I think I just ruined my career. But then I just did it because it was what I felt right, and I just let it all out. Like, I think Felicia and I were talking earlier, and she said, when it comes, you just have to let it out. And it's true. And I did that. And I wasn't sure how it was going to impact me. But at the end of the day, I felt I should do it to speak for others that were too afraid, or didn't feel comfortable speaking up. And then the day after, or within that same day, I had at least 5 women come to me crying, telling me how much it meant to them that I spoke up for them, because they said I said things in a way that they couldn't even put in words. And it really stuck with me, because I realized me being loud, quote unquote, right, or too loud, or too honest, or too frank, sometimes rubbed people the wrong way. But I am able to be that voice for other people that are just not able to speak for themselves, right? So I think it's really empowering to start to see that about yourself, like where it is that your place is, and where that authenticity can actually help people, even in that corporate environment. And a lot of leaders at some point just thanked me just for the vulnerability, for being honest and coming forward. But sometimes it's risky, and I get it, and people don't want to risk their careers to bring up things like that. So I just wanted to share that because I think it is really difficult. I think it takes some time in depending on where you're working and what that culture looks like, but we can't give up on it because I think the more we feel like we can be ourselves, then the happier we'll be and the better results we'll bring to the company as well.
Right. And sometimes we have to take risks, right? So
Yes.
that's also part of the learning and and growing process. And Vanessa, you wanted to add something?
Yes, thank you, Keisha. I think Letty and Felicia, I am hearing both of your stories, and it's amazing, to be honest, how you were able to keep your composure as well, and how well you speak for yourselves. And in that, I want to add, I think it's important for me to show up with my authentic self, even when it's hard. That means for me bringing up my Latinidad. I think Letty also mentioned a little bit about that, like bringing my cultura, my values into the workplace, into meetings. I think there are moments where I would call it imposter syndrome sometimes, where I feel like, oh, maybe I should blend in. But then I remind myself, my mom always says this one thing to me, like, nunca te olvides de donde vienes, porque de allí sale tu fuerza. And I sometimes keep on reminding myself that. I keep it in my notes app because I have like quotes that my mom says to remind me of, like, when I'm doubting myself, I'm like, ay, ¿qué diría mi mamá? O qué es algo que, what's something that she would inspire me to, like, if I'm feeling nervous about a presentation or something, or just being too Latina, because my Spanglish sometimes comes out and I'm like, no, what would our mom say? And I call her sometimes up before presentation and she's like, Vanessa, recuérdate where you came from. It's not a weakness, it's a strength that makes you who you are. And it also, like, sets the standard también para otras Latinas. They're like, if she can do it, like, eso me da también a saber that there is a space for me too. And reminds me that authenticity it's a strength, like your Latinidad-ness. And I remember, real quick, I will say this, once I volunteered to speak at a culture event that took place at Microsoft. And I think it was all about revolving what it means to be a Latina in tech. And I worried that I was just gonna, I don't know, bring out a little bit too much Spanglish, or like you said, I think some Letty said too loud. But then I don't know, I just reminded myself that is what is needed sometimes in rooms where there aren't many Latinas, and speaking up isn't a weakness. It's how we create visibility and open doors to other Latinas, kind of like Felicia and Letty were saying. And it's just reminding me that, like, cultura que nosotros tenemos and our voice in the workplace, I think it's very powerful. So I'll just close with that.
Oh, thank you. I'm loving this conversation, but I want to keep the conversation going. So I'm going to ask the second question. How do you advocate for yourself during performance reviews, negotiations, or when pursuing leadership roles, especially in rooms where you may be the only woman? And some of you already talked about being that only woman in the room. So who wants to take that one?
I can get it going, but I just want to say that what Vanessa shared earlier, even actually during the first question, is very valuable, and she kind of took the answer that I had for this one. So I think we're definitely on the same page there. I think just to reiterate what she said, the documentation, I will call it, of however you want to document your accomplishments is huge. I think that I don't remember how I started doing that either, but I think it was a game changer because what I realized was, as she was saying, the kind of the year goes by and you just assume, in my case, I just assumed, I'm like, well, I work with my boss. Of course, they're going to remember everything that I did. When we're working late at night, or I did like a project above and beyond, I just assumed they're going to remember, right? What happens is, I mean, everyone's so busy, and even I sometimes didn't remember. So what she said is spot on. I think for me, one of the biggest things is that, and I would always tell all of my team members as I became a leader, I would always tell them, like, don't rely on me to remember everything. Please document, right? Like she said, nice emails you get from people that you support, especially in my case, I was always in a support function. So I always supported either commercial people or marketing people or operations, and they're your customers, right? So I always try to save those. And another thing that I think I will just add to that is, if you're not getting those, ask for feedback. I think it's very sometimes uncomfortable, maybe for people, but it's important to ask for that feedback. I know that usually managers should be reaching out to people on your behalf and they should be getting feedback, but it's okay to do it yourself. I did it sometimes where people I knew they really loved working with me and I asked them to give me feedback and then I had it in writing. And then having those things in writing is great because especially also for promotions and things, when you're applying for jobs, um, I would say that, performance reviews, yes, but also you can use this for interviews, right? I think I saw part of the question was like negotiating salaries. I mean, definitely if you're moving companies, that's going to be key, or even within the same company. So I think the documentation, I agree, Vanessa, completely. And just making sure that you're keeping track of that. So when the time comes, you're able to voice that or write it down, however it is your company asks you for your own kind of self-evaluation. At least for us, that's how we're doing it.
So I don't have a brag book, but I have
Love that. The name.
yes, I'm gonna actually name this document that I have in Google Docs. I have a Google Docs and I call it my cheat sheet. And I try to put everything there to just keep documentation. Um, so I mean that is critical. And like you, Letty, I've been in those situations during performance evaluation time where I didn't document or I forgot something that I should have put in the performance evaluation. So it's really, really important to document those things. And then another thing or another strategy, just to throw it out there before someone else takes the floor, is LinkedIn, right? So LinkedIn has those recommendations. If there is a customer, or even if you work in a professional organization, you could ask someone to write you a recommendation. So you could also keep it on that platform too, especially when you're looking for a job, right? So that's all that I'm gonna say, and I'll pass it off to someone else. Anyone want to add to that?
I can add a little bit to this question. I would say self-advocacy. I actually had a conversation with my mentor about this, and she gave me a couple of nuggets of advice. So starts with being prepared, and before any performance review that I have with my manager, I go in with a clear story. And this is something I learned after like plenty of just anything that goes on in my career that I'm like, oh, I could learn a lesson from that. This is what I've learned. So that's why I share. And I always go in saying like, here's what I delivered. Here's the measurable impact. And here's what I'm asking for next, whether it be a raise or a promotion or a stretch project. I feel like that confidence grows when you practice. And I had to learn that lesson. And I feel like any lesson that you have is good or bad, like you learn from it, you know what I mean? And so that's something that I was actually recently juggling with. A practical tip that I would offer is to always have like your results, write them down instead of saying something like, I don't know, like I worked really hard to complete this design ad, or this, in my instance, it's like this design for this web page. Be more actionable and say like, I drove a 17% engagement lift across these 5 markets that I was working with, which directly supports our global revenue goals of X, Y, and Z. And that framing, I've actually talked to my mentor about. I feel like that would shift the conversation immediately because it shows that you're prepared and you have those notes ready. And in my situation, I feel like numbers, and in different careers too, like having those numbers to back it up, ya lo tienes ahí, and that helps you a lot. And I also want to I always like have these, like, I tell you, like these advices that women in my life have like given me, and también mi abuelita, mi mamá, she said, she was saying, cuando no hablas, o no, si no hablas, nadie te va a escuchar, o si no hablas, nadie te escucha. And that's another nugget of advice that she gave me. And I'm like, you're so right, mom. Like, o sea, cuando no, if you're not the one pitching yourself, then who's going to help you? It could be mentors y todo eso, but ultimately it's you on the line trying to vouch for that promotion or that raise. So that's like a piece of advice that I wanted to share that my mom always tells me too. So I don't know if you all can tell, but I always go to advice from my mom, mi hermana, todos. But I wanted to share that in case anyone needed to hear that at the moment who's advocating for a promotion or a raise.
And that's great advice. And it backs what Felicia said earlier about data, right? All the companies want data, and we hear that all the time. Felicia, do you want to add anything to that question?
I just want to underline everything that Letty and Vanessa said. You know, performance reviews are a lot of times people are just tired and then you have to film out for all your direct reports and this and that. And it's just so hard to like, you know, come out of that not humble. We're a team to the eye, you know, like I remember Rigoberta Menchu's book, like it was a big deliberate thing to say I, Rigoberta Menchu. And as because she grew up in an indigenous community where the collective is definitely advanced over the individual, but you have to have those I, Rigoberta Menchu moments, and what better way to do it than in performance reviews. I really, really would underscore documenting the need for promotions and other kind of career advancement things. Even if you know you've been slighted on some of these things before, you know, you should still put it there in a professional way. If you disagree with your review, I think a lot of questions that come my way are like, when do I submit a rebuttal? And what you don't want to do is vent out a million and one different things, you know, but you do want to, you know, speak softly, but with a big stick and let, you know, let's, you know, document some things here and there just to be strategic, nothing that's too wild. Negotiations in general are a whole other thing and a whole other topic. You know, it's important to be on the other side, ask for transparency on the other side, and you be transparent and know your rights. If something is brewing with respect to something in your performance review and whether you think it's retaliatory or you think that you're being underpaid, you know, of course, that's the time you work hard to have options. And so your options should also be early on to speak to an attorney or professional coach about some of the things that you're just like that are kind of in the back of your mind, but maybe need to be a little bit more front and center.
Absolutely. That's really great advice. Thank you. And my next question, I want to direct it to Felicia. As an employment discrimination lawyer who does gender and race, individual and class action matters, what would you want people to know as they navigate their careers? And you gave a little bit of those nuggets, right?
Yeah.
When you said self-care and the other things that you mentioned and pie. I won't forget about pie, but do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, really briefly, like I want to talk about, you know, arbitration clauses and what they mean. It's privatization of the courts. It makes your bargaining power vis-a-vis the company even less. There has been some legislative fixes. They're not all the way there, but you can't have arbitration clauses for sexual harassment. Certain NDAs, non-disclosure agreements are no longer valid if it involves sexual harassment. We want race harassment to catch up with sexual harassment because especially women of color, we cannot divorce our race or ethnicity from our gender. And that's oftentimes all too outside of California until recently that the law required. I want to say that we hear a lot about the pay gap. You know, there's a pay gap when women and Latinas make even less than the normal pay gap or the pay gap mostly associated with white women. An equity gap is where you take into account variables for similarly situated work, such as how long you've been with the company, you know, skills, effort, responsibility. So I want to kind of put that out there that there may be laws in your jurisdiction about equal pay and combating the pay gap and how you can encourage transparency just in conversation with your peers, but also just in conversation with your manager, and how to do that in a way that doesn't feel like, you know, like you're being accusatory and like, you know, striking the right tone. And those are things you can practice with a professional coach and things like that on how to combat those things. Promotions, I loved what I heard earlier about taking notes about like who's going where and what, who's favored by who, what, and where. Take a really good look at people that you enter into the company with around the same time with similar qualifications and what happens. And the taking credit for people's work, women's work, women of color's work, I hear that pretty routinely. So you do want to have records of that. You also want to take a look at motherhood penalties, and see, like, if the data, is dropping off for women who finally, have children or have a family in whatever capacity. The notes and energizing your ERG to get data to actually run analysis, like that's something I'm always happy to help out with. And talent retention is really contingent upon, these types of values that we heard recently be, very much so attacked in corporate America. So, those are just like a flavor of things that I wanted to highlight to maybe kind of, and these are things you can look up, and these are the kind of the first things you should be looking at, as opposed to like your objectives and what you're trying to accomplish. Like if you flip that on its head, and of what you're looking into, that's usually going to put you in a little bit better footing into navigating these worlds.
Thank you. That's really good advice. My next question is, what role does executive presence or personal branding play in your professional success, and how have you cultivated it over time? Who wants to take that?
Get started. I think I think it's a huge factor. I think both, or I guess they kind of go hand in hand, but a lot of times I've seen leaders give people, and a lot of times it tends to be women, that they don't have executive presence, right? I think that's a whole other, we could have a whole other conversation about that. So even just what that means, what that looks like. I think to me, at the end of the day, the way that I kind of translated executive presence for myself is, am I able to be in a room, in any room, and influence people, right? I think so. It can look in many different ways, executive presence, right? Some people just have this kind of energy about them. And then other times, it's even if you might not have that imposing energy, if you sit at a table, and as Vanessa said, and I really agree with her, if you're prepared, right? You're prepared, you have your data, you have your facts, you have numbers. I mean, in almost any business situation, I think that typically shows, right, that you came to be at the table to speak and have a part in the conversation. I think the biggest thing I would recommend to people is, be prepared, but be prepared to come and have, if you have the opportunity to speak up and have an opinion, because a lot of times, it doesn't have to be the right answer, but it's showing part of building that personal brand is then showing people what you represent, right? And maybe for Vanessa, it's going to be, I'm always prepared, I'm always on time, I'm always going to be on top of whatever topic we're talking about. That partly, slowly starts to become your personal brand. I think I didn't. Oh, I guess I just didn't really intentionally work on a brand earlier on in my career. And I just want to add one thing that is related to that is kind of a watch out that I would say. In my case, I'm a very, again, like happy to help, always volunteering, always doing a lot of cultural things because that's just who I am. I think when I moved to California, I was with a completely different group of people, right? They were from a different company. So I realized I had to rebrand myself. I don't have a brand with them. They don't know me. And so what happened a lot was I got feedback at some point that they thought, I was kind of the cultural girl, or the social girl, or whatever that is, right? And people not behind my back, when I was not there, I got the feedback that from one of my mentors, that people were saying, I like, my strength is more in my social things and cultural things. They weren't talking about the impact I'm having in the business, which was a lot, by the way. And so I think I learned the hard way that sometimes it's great to do things you love, and it's great to do things. And, I was in ERGs, I was leading an ERG, or helping, one of the leaders within the ERG as well. And so to them, they just thought I spent all my time doing these other things. Right. So sometimes it's hard. It's hard to swallow that. And it was tough for me because I'm like, I'm giving all this extra time. At the end of the day, and I think someone once told me, the perception, right? It is your personal brand. Whether you do that or not, or whether that's true or not, it's what other people think of us. So we just have to be very mindful of that. And I think that's the only kind of thing I'll share, that it could harm you sometimes, right? So you don't want to be that person that, like, they're not talking about your impact or your strategy because you're the happy hour person or the ERG person. So at least in my case, right, in finance, like, a lot of the people that led that function were just not as involved, so they just didn't know the details behind it, and I have to just accept that. So yes, it's super important. Be very intentional and just be careful with sometimes what brand starts developing without you even realizing it.
Anyone else want to add to that?
I can speak a little bit more about the personal branding side of things. I love what Letty said, and I can add a little bit more, maybe a little bit more about my experience of how I've been able to juggle that. I've learned that, I think I have already mentioned this in the previous question a little bit more, but bringing more of your Latina identity, especially in tech right now, it's helped me build stronger connections, and not only with other Latinas, but with other colleagues from different backgrounds. And I think that has been a strength. Been able to make some great mentors, but also what I would say is advocates in my team and outside of my team and sister teams. And I've also leaned in a little bit more on my experience being a content creator on YouTube, on TikTok and Instagram, which has really taught me how to tell stories that resonate. And I think that's really important, how to capture attention, how to be consistent in how I show up. And I also carry that same experience and that same energy into my career. So in tech, making sure people remember not just the work that I am sharing or the data or the projects that I'm presenting, but the perspective that I bring. I also joined a Toastmasters group earlier in the year, and it has been helping me become more confident, more intentional in how I speak, in and it's made a difference. So I would say to anyone who's out there as well, listen to this panel, I would highly consider joining a Toastmasters group that has, and it's a Latino Toastmasters group, so we're all from Latino backgrounds, and that has helped me in how I communicate, how I show up. And I also tell my mentees this, like, treat your personal brand like it's an ongoing project that you're investing in. Check in with yourself every couple of weeks, every couple of months, and say, like, how are you showing up, whether it be like online, on LinkedIn, in meetings, at work, in conversations, whether you're like at a networking event with other Latinos or non-Latinos, and does this align with what story you want to portray, if that makes sense. So it's not like a one-time effort where you're like, oh, it's just going to take editing just your LinkedIn profile, but I would say it takes practice, and it's something that I've been working on actively. But I that's why I share like the Toastmasters group, and I always try to share with any friends. I'm like, yo, this actually has helped me with my branding, with how I show up, because it's important. And yeah, that's a little bit of advice that I would share.
Yeah. No gatekeeping, right, Vanessa? And Letty, I had a similar situation where I was known as the DEI girl. And it actually helped me propel my career. And someone else in another department heard that I was a DEI girl and offered me a position. So, it could also work both ways. But when I was in that original space, it would have, been it would have been like that other people weren't looking at my work, my impact, my real impact, and only looking at my ERG work and things like that. So, Felicia, did you want to add anything? I think I saw you come off of mute.
I know we're gonna have some questions soon.
Yes.
I separate a lot of employees, the employees who do have relationships with the leadership and execs, irrespective of the merits of their claims. Those employees can usually get out of situations with the negotiated elevated exit package much quicker. There's actual sometimes real genuine under confidential settings apologies, so there could be closure for the employee. So, I mean, I'll defer to Letty and Vanessa in terms of executive presence and the importance of it. But I will say from my perspective, it really can make a load of difference in terms of when things go awry, even after you've put your all into your role and into your company. Personal branding is also, I just really came late to it. I didn't go to college when there was social media. I think I had a Facebook towards the end of law school. It was a little weird. But it is like people tell me, like, you just have to get over it. You do have to do it. You do need to put some time into it, even if it seems utilitarian. You know, one of my clients who is a woman of color exec at a major media entertainment company, and she's like, if you're going to bet on something, bet on yourself. So it's part and parcel to, you know, your branding is your bet and your investment in yourself. And so whenever you feel weird or ick or something like that, you know, try to decipher where that's coming from, and try to understand that it can be evolving. It shouldn't be a revolving door of change, but, you know, because it should be true to you, you know, but it is something that you should spend some time into doing, and that is a necessity in this world.
Thank you so much. You've been incredible panelists, dropping a lot of little gems there. Letty, Felicia, and Vanessa, thank you so much for sharing such thoughtful and impactful perspectives. So now, as we begin to wrap up, I just want to see if there's any questions in the chat really quickly. So, what strategies have you used to build influence and credibility when you are the only woman in the room? Who wants to take that?
I can say I can get it going unless Vanessa wants to or Felicia wants to talk on this. I think it goes back to some of the things we said, but I definitely think one of the biggest things that I've used is, again, preparation, right? Just being prepared. I don't think anything can help more than that. At the end of the day, it comes back to being prepared, whether that's researching. For example, what I do a lot is I look at who's going to be in the meeting, right? And who are the people that are going to be in the meeting? Who are my stakeholders? What type of agenda might each of them have? And I kind of put all of this under being prepared, but I also have, you know, alternative. I mean, being in finance, one of the things, and I'll share, like I had a meeting very early on in my career. I was supporting one of a very top leader in finance, and I was very afraid because I heard that those meetings were really tough. And at the end of the day, every time I went into those meetings, it was preparation. And he, at some point, had really good feedback about myself and my manager. And one of the things that I used to do is I used to have different versions of the same like presentation, because I thought, okay, well, if he asks me, I already knew he was a detail oriented person. And so even though I had a high level view, I used to prepare like the double, like what we call like a double click on the numbers, right? So kind of like a second level and third level of detail, because I thought, okay, if he's going to ask for this, then I'll just have it. It's not going to be a follow up. And I remember the first time I did that, his attitude completely changed. Like after that, everything we brought to him, like when I showed him something, he just already trusted. So I think part of it is preparation, being prepared, and then that helps you build trust. I think once you build trust in any kind of relationship or in any sort of environment you're in, that's what starts to build that influence. Because once people trust you, then they're listening to you. And once you have a good business case, I think one of the Felicia or Vanessa mentioned something about having a business case. It's kind of thinking of that way, right? Whatever it is you're going to come into, you have that business case, whether it's for yourself or for whatever you're pitching or anything else. And that all kind of comes together. So that's what I would say to that. I don't know if either of you want to add anything.
I like that one a lot, Letty. I think preparation is a big one, where you always have to come ready for what could be thrown at you. Because honestly, it's like my mom always tells me, like, Vanessa, lo que sea, estar preparada it's like one of the biggest things. So in case no one can say you're no está preparada, no, like she doesn't know her stuff. So I think preparation, and then another one that I've talked to my mentor about a lot is like the learning mindset. Microsoft is very big on that. And I approach as many meetings that I'm like brought into, even if I'm just there to listen, I approach it with the chance that I'm able to learn from it. I'm always asking questions. At least I try to. When I'm curious, or if I'm able to, whether I'm in a design review or in a meeting with the stakeholders, and I'm just meeting because I'm supporting. So I'm lending a helping hand to a colleague because it shows that I'm engaged, and I think that's like a big thing, having that learning mindset. It helps me get to maybe like, I don't know, in rooms where I wasn't even considered for, and they're like, oh, Vanessa can maybe help with this, because I know she was in this meeting and she mentioned she's an expert in this, in Tableau, or in a program that they're inquiring about. And so it sparks for discussion of your name, like who can help with this? Oh, Vanessa has been asking and been very present. And so your visibility in meetings, I think that's something that I've learned is quite important too. And I think that helps with building your credibility, your visibility, and your branding that comes into play in the question that you had asked us earlier. And so that's what I would say. I'll pass it over to Felicia.
I don't know if I have too much to ask, to add. You all like nailed things here. I used to confuse credibility with legitimacy, and got to be careful with that. I think in the legal field, there's all these things that say you're legit, that can just be contributing to elitism. And credibility is, putting your performance out there, being prepared, and all the wonderful things that really, having thoughtful questions and, having a presence, so you're not just, one of the many in the meeting. We'll just kind of pass this on back to Keisha for any more questions, because I really do value and think it's pretty spot on from what I've learned from my clients that Letty and Vanessa have shared.
Yes. So thank you. And I want to be mindful of time. So thank you to you again, panelists, for such impactful and empowering advice. And thank you all for joining us on this inspiring conversation in honors of Women Equity Day. We hope you're leaving today empowered. I know I am. Informed and motivated to continue advocating for gender equity in your own spaces, because true progress happens when we work together, speak up, and lead with intention. As we continue this critical conversation, critical conversations, we're excited to invite you to our next session on September 17th, where we'll be celebrating Hispanic Heritage Month with another dynamic and engaging webinar. Stay tuned for more details, and it's going to be a powerful conversation. Thank you again for joining us, and until next time, take care and keep leading with change.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.